we will dive right into the skin node, and here we will group it a little bit. What I have a problem with is that you can see a lot of the eyelid exposed, and I want to change that and crank up the white tones a little bit. So in order to do that, I will add a fit function where I will put down the input maximum to 0.5. And you can see it's already a bit more exposed. With a blur. Usually the fit functions work great with blurs because you can crank it up at any time and shift the border by doing that. So that's a very good way in order to do quick fixes. If you want to do like a proper fix, I would always go back into the map and paint the areas that you need to extend. So here we're going to take a look into the length. Usually I have multiple length node in my scenes, and here it's just the overall length node. I will also have a second length node with like randomized values for each primitive. Here we have to put it to 2 as a value because our length is by default set to 0.5. And you can see it already picks it up, but we don't have any information stored in there yet, so you won't see much of a difference. Especially on the nose bridge, I would love to have like a shorter value. So in order to do that, I will take the no hair attribute and multiply that into my length attribute in the dependency section. So I will just define that as it is. Set it to an equal value of the same attribute and multiply it with the no hair. And get rid of all the typos I put in there. At the instance, I will also set up a width value. Usually I set up my width value based on the density value, but I will make sure to just not put the output to 0, otherwise you will end up with 0 with hair, which only takes up memory. So you can see that the length node is already I will also set up a width value to our skin attribute as a multiply to our expression. I will also put the blend a little bit down so I don't end up with just doubles, but so here I'm basically duplicating the length node and I'm reshuffling stuff. So in the overall node, I will keep it at no hair. This currently set to 0.5. So in one, there will be the cutoff of the no hair group, while in the other one, our length adjustment will be applied to it. And I will also try out different methods, like the cut or extend and the scale node. Sometimes you get better results with the other, so always test that out. So going back to the skin attributes, as we already used the no hair attribute in the singular length node, we don't need it no longer as a dependency here. Here I will add the length and lift as well into the paint attributes and set it to the length. We'll speed this up a little bit. And I will make the eyeballs pop a little bit more. They have like triangular shapes around the eyelids, and also the cheeks look a little. So we will go into our hair system and see how that looks like. You can see that the cheeks are not particularly long. They could definitely be longer. So what I now want to build is like a visualizer that I can use in order to paint my maps. What you have to do is you have to lock it, which is like the icon on the left bottom if you hover over a node. Otherwise it will live update and it will take forever to evaluate. So always try to lock it. But yeah, with this preview activated, you can see how long your hair usually is like and where you want to change it in the long run. You can probably increase the hair count a little bit there as well. I will increase it to a higher value so I can see a change. 5 is probably a little bit too much as a value, so I will probably turn that down a little bit later on. Most of the shapes will come from a secondary system that I will build later on anyway, so we don't have to worry about the cheeks too much at this stage. When I build my characters, I always have like a base directionality, and from there I will just add shapes as I go and blend that over with the base directionality. That way I keep everything interactive, and if the client doesn't want, for example, the ear shapes, I can just take them out or build another one that I will lock into that slot. And now we will have a look into the whiskers. That's why I'm bringing up some whisker images on the left. First of all, we will start with the guide groom again. I'll just call this whisker guides. Connect it to my skin again. I always like to build my own hair gen, so I never go over the interface when it comes to the density. Make sure to also deactivate the subdivision curves and set the density to 0. You probably also don't need the fur directionality on these ones, so turn that off as well. Here I will just drop a guide groom. This node will allow you to draw directly on your character. And I will resample it with the segment mode to uniform, segment counts to 15. And then you have multiple options. So I always start with blend guides. And then I will use the screen brush with the unconstrained length in order to bring them out. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty similar to the action guide curve settings. There are a couple of weird things about the brush. For example, if you paint on an edge or if your camera is aligned weirdly, it will act differently. But in this node, you should have everything in order to set it up very similar to other grooming softwares. Then I will also drop a mirror with the reverse normals to no. And then it's pretty straightforward. It's just placing guides and using the screen brush in order to bring them in place. There are a couple of cool settings. For example, you can also readjust the root position, which is pretty insane. Not a lot of grooming softwares have that, but I use it all the time when I groom. Over the primitive group, you can select which hair group you want to work on. Selection settings. When you work on whiskers or grooming in general, it's always good to have a lot of references, especially for whiskers. They're always facing outwards, and a lot of people are doing this wrong. If you have a look into ArtStation, and the mirror node is extremely helpful in order to see if everything looks correct from an artistic point of view. Node, which allows you to basically cut off the tips of the hair. It's very similar to other grooming softwares. When I have a hair that is shorter, I will just bring it in place and then cut it off. So here we have our whisker guides ready. Did with the group node, but in this case we will just transfer attributes. So we have a black body and we color the hairs white, and then we will just transfer the color information over from the guides to the skin. And crank down the distance threshold a little bit. You can also experiment with the blend width settings there. Usually it's a combination of both if you groom over that way. This has been a very reliable way for me to groom stuff. It's very useful to do a quick groom, especially if you are under time pressure. When it comes to simulation, you might be in a bit of trouble because you have to write out the skins again and then attribute copy those attributes over to the animesh. So before hitting the CFX stage, you most likely need to transfer all the attributes. And here we will set up a active area that is based on the color R information. And we will connect this to a hair gen. See if that works out. We can disable the further actionality once more. I will bring down the density as well. And then I will set as a density attribute, we'll set it to the active area that we just generated. And it will give us an error, which is that the skin attributes are missing on the guides, because we haven't used the interface where you reference the skin. So in order to fix that, you need to drop this node, guide skin attribute into, and connect it to the skin. It also complains about a rest attribute here, so I will create a rest position for the guides as well. And that should work. I'm no longer getting any errors, but as you can see, the width is so tiny that we almost see nothing, so I will increase this a lot. And it looks like a lot of hairs are being spawned in the same place. So what you have to do in order to fix that is you have to increase the influence radius. That I just set up. So we will go a little bit low on this value. My actual hair. At this stage, we will also resample our guides before they go into the hair system, because that resolution is what's being picked up on the hair itself. And I will go to a higher value to have a more even distribution. And end up with like super small hairs having 200 CV points. So I rather like to use the first option if I'm going to deal with this node. And I will also drop the smooth node to have a more even distribution of the root positions. So here I'm going to add a side length node, set it to multiply and scale. Then I will give it a randomized value and add shorter hair and longer hair at the same one. I'm very unhappy with some of the hairs being spawned so close to the nose, so I will try to get rid of that by increasing the relax iterations, but it doesn't seem to change much. I will also try to change the scatter seed, but it only makes stuff worse at this stage. So I will revert it to more human values and try to randomize the seed a little bit until I find something that I'm kind of happy about. The key to Houdini grooms is to keep your setups open so they work with like randomized values, but another key is to just hit random till you hit a good seed that looks good from all perspective and then write that out. Usually in Houdini you can't store this because if you change the density map, for example, the seed will also change, and this makes it extremely hard if you have like one favorite clump to work with. So always build your setups to work in multiple seeds. For the Whiskers is kind of an exception because I'm not planning to change anything on the density at a later stage, so I will change the seed more often and see if I can find a favorite version. Note, in order to ruffle these Whiskers up a little bit more, when you're done with it and you're like the look of your guides, you have to connect it to the output node. We'll also lock the guides as they are at the moment. And I will also start trying to define a second value called whisker width, which will fade them off a little bit more at the front and around the eyebrows. Most of the times I will also use the same value both for width and density settings. Also to be thicker than in other regions. Then we will also mirror this node. Set it to other attributes and add the attribute as a point attribute. I'm very careful for this. With working with this node, I will always set We'll also set up color node to visualize attribute here. And then I will add another attribute wrangle after the blur. And I will add the attribute into the blur value. You have the option to pin an interface by going into a different node. So I will pin this interface here and adjust it while viewing the color node. It's a little bit similar to my load selected attribute. So you can always pin and unpin it. So here I will add an attribute wrangle and I will unpin it and multiply it with the other value, the active area value that we defined early on. So then I will exchange the skin for this new stream, both inputs there. Copy this new node that we just defined. So if you increase your density, you will see that it will only increase in the areas that you painted early on. Or at least increase more in these areas. I'm not too happy with how much it increases, so I will clamp this value up a bit more too. So I will clamp these darker areas a little bit more by putting this first value to 0.1, which is the input minimum. I will also add this as a width value as well. Now it's time to experiment with the seeds again. So yeah, what I like to do is I like to find the perfect seed for this one, because I'm not planning to touch this for a while, at least not in the density settings, so it wouldn't reset. I will turn down the active area a bit too, because I don't like how much hair is being spawned at the eyebrow area. So yeah, it's being clamped a little bit too much, so I will put this to a lower value and eventually putting this to 0 here.